A mother of many children went to die in her late grandmother's house. And when she found a strange niche in the floor, the village froze. Rebecca hoped desperately that this time the doctor would tell her something good. No, a mother of 3 4-year-olds simply had no right to die. So why had all this happened? Wasn't it enough for fate that she had taken away Ernest, her beloved husband, and her grandmother Caroline? The small, skinny blonde trembled with fear as she awaited the results of her repeat tests. It seemed she was the only one trying to stand up against the whole world. Rebecca, the doctor adjusted his glasses sternly as she entered, as if he didn't know her name. Dr. Marcus fiddled with his glasses just like last time. His lips were pressed together. This was clearly a bad sign. "Mr. Marcus, don't drag this out." "What did the test show?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Actually, it's not customary for us to speak about such results directly, but knowing your situation and the need to make arrangements for the children," he paused, and to Rebecca, it sounded like a death sentence. Make arrangements for the children in advance. Those words clearly did not bode well. Marcus Edwards cleared his throat slightly and continued, "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but I have nothing to comfort you with. The oncology is at a very advanced stage, and there can be no mistakes." "And there's nothing that can be done?" Her hands became so cold that Rebecca felt as if she had already died. "Well, there's a chance, as they say, 50-50, but it requires a very expensive operation." The doctor felt uncomfortable. For some reason, Marcus Edwards felt guilty, even though he saw streams of unfortunate people before him every day who lost their chance at recovery simply because they didn't have the money, and he couldn't help everyone no matter how much he wanted to. But he felt particularly sorry for Rebecca. He knew that 4 years ago she had given birth to 3 wonderful boys and then became a widow. It seemed all the troubles had fallen upon this young and fragile woman, and he could do nothing to help. "How much is it going to cost?" She clung to any hope. Marcus Edwards named an amount that could buy a 3-room apartment in the city. Of course, Rebecca couldn't find that kind of money. She had no savings. "Well, I'll try to borrow from someone," she said almost automatically, knowing herself that there was little chance of success since her acquaintances were just as poor and lived only slightly better. And yet she had to try. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I really do feel sorry." Marcus Edwards seemed to be saying goodbye to her, and that finally upset the young woman. If even this doctor didn't believe in her salvation, then there was probably no chance. Rebecca didn't reply to him. She didn't know what to do next. She stepped outside, desperately needing at least a breath of air that didn't smell like hospital corridors. It was nice outside. The first spring drips fearlessly tapped a rhythm on the roof and fell on the young leaves. "And when I'm gone, everything will remain the same. The sun will shine, some young lovers will stroll hand in hand, and yet no one will ever be able to explain to Albert, Alfred, and Alan why they suddenly ended up in an orphanage. Maybe someone will adopt them? But most likely, they'll be separated. And will they even find good parents?" She tried to forbid herself from thinking about the bad, but it didn't work. The funeral of her husband, which she organized a year ago, rose before her eyes. And there wasn't even enough money for that. It was good that her co-workers contributed. But how else could it be, considering it was on the construction site that a concrete block fell on Ernest's head? The management had promised to pay a large insurance sum for noncompliance with safety regulations, but then their lawyer found a loophole. He blamed it all on a drinker who had long since quit and left for his sunny country. Now he couldn't be found even if you searched for him with a lantern, and you couldn't prove that he was to blame. What cruel-hearted people run this construction company? They showed no pity for a widow with 3 children. Can they even be called people? She noticed a bench nearby. It was wet from the rain, but Rebecca didn't care. She wanted to think a little, or rather, to relive all the pain that she had unjustly endured. At home, she couldn't cry in front of the children, and remembering without shedding tears was impossible. Rebecca didn't immediately become an orphan, and that made it even more painful. Starting from the age of 10, she grew up with her grandmother in the village, and before that, she had a mother and father like almost all children. She didn't clearly remember her parents, but the wide shoulders of her father, his kind, slightly tired smile, and his cheerful brown eyes remained in her memory. She remembered her mother as always welcoming, smiling, quiet, and affectionate. Rebecca resembled her. Recently, she looked at a photo of her mother, compared it to her own reflection in the mirror, and gasped. It was one face, one figure. Her parents loved her very much, spoiled her as best they could, and said they would always support her. They probably would have, but a blown tire on the road led to the car flying off the edge of the bridge and instantly sinking into the water. Granddaughter, what a sorrow. Her grandmother, with a frozen face, threw a handful of earth on the coffin that had already been lowered into the grave. She tried to smile, but nothing worked. Her face just twisted in a spasm, and her eyes turned red from tears. She gave Rebecca a handful of soil. The girl cried and didn't want to take it. She felt that if she didn't say goodbye to her parents right now, they would definitely come back. But Grandma Caroline insisted it was necessary. She explained that those up above know better when and whom to take to themselves, and that this should be respected. What if they take me too, if they can't bring back Dad and Mom? Rebecca asked at that time. No, granddaughter, you'll be glad you stayed here. I'm sure you'll be happy. It seemed Grandma said this not very confidently. Rebecca didn't ask any more questions so as not to upset her. She knew Grandma wasn't in the best of health herself. Every morning, she would groan for a long time before starting her day's work. Rebecca settled in with her in the village. She tried in every way to help with the household. In a year, she learned to cook, weed the garden, do laundry, and even helped sell vegetables and greens to the summer residents living nearby. I see you love to read books. When you go to the city, you'll study and be able to teach children or work in a library. You're such a smart girl. Grandma praised her diligence and good grades, gifted her beautiful and smart books, and even managed to save enough so that her granddaughter could go to the city and receive a proper education. Only later did Rebecca realize what a feat this was for an elderly woman who had lost her only daughter. Back in her childhood and youth, it seemed that Grandma Caroline was very strong and would always be there for Rebecca, which is why she decided there was nothing terrible about going to the city and enrolling in university. After all, she planned to do it for Grandma as well. You'll see, you'll be proud of me, Grandma, she declared before leaving. Oh, I have no doubt. Just be careful with young men. Don't trust everyone. It's better to be friends first, check a person out, finish university, or else you know how quickly children can appear. You're a beauty, just like your mother. There won't be any shortage of suitors, Grandma advised Rebecca on her journey. Don't worry, Grandma. Of course, I won't throw myself at every scoundrel. You know my character, Rebecca laughed. She was very young. Life seemed cloudless and promised only good things. She intended to choose a husband for life, have children, get an education, and help her grandmother. And everything went as if scripted. Rebecca managed to enroll in a free program which almost no one from the villages could achieve. The professors sought to push their own students into these spots, but Rebecca was lucky. When she took her exams, there was a professor on the commission who only accepted students based on talent. He immediately took it upon himself to help the brave and intelligent girl and ensured she got a free spot. You'll see, you have a literary gift. If you study well, you'll go far in whatever path you choose, he told her. I'll try, Rebecca promised. And so, she became a student in the philology department. Her studies came easily. Few in her class could compare with her. However, malicious tongues said that she was the professor's protégée, but Rebecca put in all her efforts to make her grandmother proud. She couldn't deceive, so when Grandma asked, "So, how are your studies going, my dear?" she always honestly replied that they were at the highest level. And why have you been so happy lately? Have you met someone? Grandma asked this with noticeable concern. The granddaughter was very young and simply couldn't understand the responsibility that lay on a girl after meeting a young man. In the old days, they did it right by introducing young people themselves, and then there was an immediate wedding. Now, it was unclear how to control the youth. They might just meet a foolish person who would cloud their judgment with charm, and then wait for trouble if a guy who couldn't control himself met her, let alone take responsibility for a wife. There were so many cunning, greedy, and mama's boys who, if they did marry, would humiliate their wives. Grandma had retold all these options to her grown-up granddaughter many times, but understood well that youth is driven by hormones. Once they fell in love, everything would fly out the window, no matter how much you said. Oh, if only they would listen to their elders, how many broken destinies could have been avoided. The truth is that Rebecca's mother married a good man, yet cruel fate still caught up with her. Grandma Caroline understood all this, but couldn't help but worry about her granddaughter. Kind, beautiful, and intelligent. There would be many who would want to get close to her. Yes, Grandma, I've met someone. His name is Ernest, Rebecca said joyfully. Actually, they had been spending all their free time together for quite some time now, and all the girls in her class were already waiting for them to get married. The boys had long since stopped approaching Rebecca because they knew that Ernest had beaten them to it. However, Rebecca was in no hurry to share this news with her grandmother because she was too worried about her personal life, but now it was time to tell her, as they planned to get married right after graduation. So, she needed to prepare Grandma mentally for this important change. Rebecca laid all this out during their phone call. Is he really going to marry you? I hope he doesn't get you pregnant and then run off into the bushes, Grandma sighed. But Rebecca just laughed. You'll see for yourself. Ernest is simply wonderful. Sometimes I feel like we share one soul. Oh, everyone thinks that in their youth, Grandma sighed, but she was worrying for nothing. Ernest did indeed ask for his granddaughter's hand right in front of her, and then the young couple had a modest student wedding for their closest friends and family. This reassured Grandma Caroline that her granddaughter had made the right choice. The young man turned out to be a decent person. He promised to marry her and did so without delay. About 3 months later, when Rebecca's belly started to round, Grandma learned that when Rebecca got married, she was already 2 months along. But this only further convinced her that Ernest was indeed serious about her. Grandma, could he have done otherwise? I'm having triplets. Who would leave a woman in such a situation? Rebecca was surprised that Grandma was praising Ernest for merely keeping his promise. Oh, Rebecca. You're still so young. Believe me, a man like your husband is worth his weight in gold, especially since you're expecting triplets. Oh, if only I could live to see it. Grandma was happy to think she would see her great-grandchildren, and even 3 at once. Ernest got a job on a construction site to earn more money. They rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Rebecca was admitted to the hospital a month before her expected due date. Are you joking? How can I lie in the hospital for a whole month? I need to feed my husband and run the household, she protested, upset. Madam, are you in your right mind? You have a narrow pelvis. You'll need a cesarean. Do you think it's easy to give birth to 3 at once? If you can't understand that this is the only option, I will speak with your husband. Surely, he will want his children to be born healthy and for his wife to stay alive, the doctor said sternly. Don't, I'll explain it myself. Rebecca didn't want that grim doctor to scare her husband. She just informed him that it was now customary to admit expectant mothers to the maternity ward early in case of premature labor. Her husband said it was good that she would be safe and visited her regularly. Rebecca thanked the strict doctor 100 times later. The labor began 2 weeks early, unexpectedly, and was very difficult. If she had insisted on her own and stayed home, it was unlikely any of them would have survived. What wonderful babies! In my memory, it's rare for all 3 to be born so healthy, and the mother feels good too. You know, it seems you're very lucky, said the obstetrician. This is my Rebecca. It couldn't be otherwise. She's a wonderful granddaughter. Grandma boasted to the villagers about her good fortune, and they agreed. She had raised her granddaughter and lived to see her great-grandchildren. And still, Rebecca managed to have 3 at once, the villagers said, using her as an example to their grandchildren who weren't in a hurry to start families. I walk around the village like a queen. Everyone asks questions and envies me. Why do I have such happiness? Grandma rejoiced. But that happiness was given to her for only a year. Rebecca called and asked her and her husband to come, saying she had dreamed that her daughter would come for her that weekend. The young couple only laughed at her belief in dreams but decided to go anyway. Grandma Caroline was cheerful and rosy. They were glad she was feeling better. You see, and you make up silly things. You're still young. You'll live to be 100 or even longer. Rebecca was happy that her beloved grandma was cheerful and lively. All day long, she played with her grandchildren, recalling various funny stories from Rebecca's childhood, and then she fell asleep and didn't wake up. She passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. She was a great worker. So she deserved it, the villagers said. Your grandma knew everything. She showed us in advance where to bury her. She never brought it up before, Ernest said quietly. He had also come to love his wife's grandmother. He even considered her his own. He had no living grandparents from either side, and his relationship with his parents was rather cool. They were very displeased that their son had chosen a wife and job they deemed unpromising. He saw his grandchildren barely a few times a year and didn't even consider it necessary to help them financially. Because of this, Ernest had grown very attached to Grandma Caroline. He and his wife mourned her loss deeply. Only a year later did the grief somewhat subside. Still, the children and his beloved wife prevented him from dwelling too long in sad memories. They continued living in their rented apartment. Ernest now took on 2 shifts at the construction site. Ernest, well, of course, we need a lot of things, but you've become scatterbrained and aren't getting enough sleep. You're going to ruin your health. Let's have you work less. I was thinking I could take a part-time job as a cleaner, and then you can at least rest at night. It's only a few hours. Rebecca started to worry about him. No, come on. I'm a man. I won't let you work too. Having 3 little ones is already a crazy load. They're so restless. The head of the family was speaking pure truth. If one laughed, the others would immediately spring into action, and if one cried, they would all follow suit. And as for laundry, cooking, and just taking them outside for a walk, that was already a feat. Rebecca, though happy as a mother, was starting to look like a ghost. No, Ernest simply could not allow his wife to work too. And just like that, another year passed. When the babies turned 3, their father gave them luxurious gifts. He was cheerful and joked. Marcus Farrell, Alfred Farrell, and Albert Farrell, don't let me down, protect your mom. Ernest, don't joke like that, Rebecca asked. She felt anxious that her husband seemed to be entrusting their 3-year-old toddlers with taking care of her. Rebecca, don't take it so seriously. Look how attentively they're listening to me. They're growing into real men, serious ones. The little boys were indeed watching their father very closely. They even paused from their toys for a moment. However, it lasted only a minute. Then Alfred started again with building blocks. Albert decided to take them away from him, and Alan, ever the peacemaker, took the blocks from both brothers and didn't return them until both had calmed down. Alan was the youngest, but his parents joked that he probably just let his brothers go ahead because he always took care of everyone. He looked after not only his brothers but also his parents, behaving like a true big brother, even though Albert was actually the firstborn. That day became the last and happiest day in Rebecca's family life, but at the time, she didn't know it. The next day, her husband's colleague called her. Rebecca, unfortunately, I have bad news for you, and for us too. An accident has happened. What happened to Ernest? Which hospital did they take him to? Rebecca thought her husband had just injured his arm or leg. You see, it's no longer a hospital. He can't be saved, But the guys and I will chip in for the funeral, he sighed. In truth, the management bore a significant portion of the blame for not updating the equipment for a long time and for cutting corners on repairs. The crane that lifted the block should have been decommissioned long ago. It was simply impossible to secure the concrete block properly on it. It fell on Ernest's head from a great height and crushed him so badly that he had to be buried in a closed coffin. At the funeral, there was a long conversation with the parents of her deceased husband for the first time, and it was not a pleasant one. "Well, look what you've done, you silly girl. You sat around, resting with the kids, while you drained all the strength from Ernest. It's no surprise he didn't last long." "It was only a matter of time," said her mother-in-law, who had long held a grudge against her daughter-in-law, considering her unsuitable. "And what does it matter to her? Do you think she cares? She'll find someone new soon enough, but no one will bring our son back," added her father-in-law. "How can you be so shameless? Would I have had children with someone I didn't love? If I could, I would gladly give my life just to bring back Ernest." At the funeral, Rebecca tried her best to stay calm, but then she had a real breakdown. She sobbed, barely holding herself up, her hands shaking treacherously. "Oh, look at our daughter-in-law. She's even drinking. No wonder our son treated her that way." "You can't even leave this drunkard alone with the kids," remarked the merciless mother-in-law. "Or maybe she's already celebrating her freedom with a new suitor. They're like that in the village, they don't mourn for long," her husband supported her. "Why are you people like this? You didn't want to help us with Ernest, only lectured us and lived your lives for your own pleasure, and now you're dumping a bucket of dirt on me." Rebecca was speaking pure truth. Her parents had indeed refused Ernest when he asked to buy out his share of the apartment. Once, the deceased grandmother from her mother's side had gifted it to her favorite grandson, but her mother and father were outraged, claiming they were being kicked out of the apartment, which was absurd. At that time, Rebecca saw a lot of rudeness from their side. Her mother-in-law even had a genetic test done to ensure that the grandchildren were indeed hers. But when everything was confirmed, she still refused to help in any way. The young couple, who wanted to ease their lives and receive support, lost all hope. Ernest's parents also didn't allow them to live with them. They immediately warned that they would turn the young couple's life into hell. "Funny how you didn't rush to sell your house but clung tightly to our share. You always wanted to appropriate it," the mother-in-law continued without calming down. "But it wasn't for sale. It's practically a wreck, built long ago, and the plot is tiny. And there are drinking people living nearby. No one needs those problems." Rebecca didn't even know why she was justifying herself to these people. They hated her anyway. Why talk to her? She'll end up drunk, and then she'll send the kids to an orphanage. "Just remember, dearie, we don't want any defective offspring," concluded the dreadful conversation her father-in-law, and proudly walked away. Rebecca was only glad about one thing, that the funeral was finally over. Almost everyone had left and didn't witness this inhumane scene. She had always known that she couldn't count on Ernest's parents, but now they had definitively made it clear that she shouldn't get in their way or expect anything. Heavy days followed. There was no light in sight. The three little ones knew nothing about their father's passing. Rebecca told them he had just gone away. The children ran around joyfully, playing, while Rebecca continued to try to sell her grandmother's house to raise some money. She had a little savings left, but it wouldn't last long. She had to take a part-time job cleaning floors. The money, however, melted away faster than spring snow. It was there one moment and gone the next. What had it been spent on? Just the essentials, as always. Only those critical necessities piled up so much that no amount of money could suffice. Time and again, she lost rounds to cruel fate. She didn't receive any compensation from Ernest's employers because she had no money for a lawyer and couldn't mend her relationship with her late husband's parents, though it was unlikely that was even possible. Her mother-in-law continued to blame her for her son's death and refused to see the grandchildren. However, the children themselves weren't upset about it. They had always seen their paternal grandparents very rarely. They came with pursed lips, dissatisfied faces, and unwanted gifts, leaving as quickly as they could. Ernest used to jokingly call these visits official ones, but now there was no one to support Rebecca in her grief. No one could even listen to her. 6 months after her husband's death and her desperate struggle for survival, she started feeling pain in her chest, which grew more frequent and intense. She had to go to the hospital. She thought they would prescribe some medicine and everything would be fine, but the doctor ordered some rather serious tests. She had said then, "What do you mean? It's just a muscle cramp from nerves. I've been through so much." "Listen, Rebecca, just get the tests done. I wouldn't advise it without reason. We have plenty to do here at the hospital, believe me." Rebecca immediately remembered the stern obstetrician who had saved her and her children's lives with his advice. She didn't argue. She did everything as instructed. That was how she learned from Marcus Edwards that she had cancer, and today's repeat test confirmed it. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" A grim-looking young man called out to her. She remembered him. He was Morgan, the nephew of her grandmother's friend. He had once been a significant person, a prosecutor, but then his wife died, and his misfortunes didn't end there. His 8-year-old daughter had gone swimming in a pond with her friends one evening without her father's permission and drowned. The most painful part was that 2 girls were saved, but they couldn't reach her in time. Morgan blamed himself for everything. Truth be told, not without reason. His daughter had hardly seen her father at home in a sober state. He drank excessively and went to work every morning as if nothing had happened. No one suspected that he had completely lost his footing. Later, when he buried his daughter next to his wife in the village cemetery, he cried and begged for forgiveness. The men had to drag him away from the grave. It was late autumn. Morgan would have completely lost his mind if it weren't for the kind people nearby. Thus, the entire village learned of the unfortunate man's grief. Of course, it was hard to bear all of this, but enduring the death of one's child is terrifying. And if you feel guilty, even indirectly, it's something that is impossible to imagine. Morgan decided not to move far from the cemetery. He resigned from his prosecutorial position and became a gamekeeper in the woods, communicating with almost no one. Rebecca recalled all this almost instantly when he unexpectedly called out to her. Well, what a sign. To meet someone whose wife died of cancer. It seems I won't live long either, she thought sadly. Just treating a cold, Rebecca lied. She didn't want to talk to this grim, tall, thin, and bearded brunette about her troubles. He had enough on his plate. And how are your kids? I remember Grandma Caroline bragged about having 3 great-grandchildren. The grim man suddenly smiled, resembling more his own shadow. Once, Morgan had been rosy-cheeked, healthy, and cheerful, always joking. He could even play the guitar from memory and was only 15 years older than Rebecca. She remembered him as a teenager. She knew his wife, whom she also met in the village. Whitney was a very lively, sparkling, dazzlingly fair-skinned, slender, and active girl with red hair. When they celebrated their wedding, the whole village rejoiced, and then parents from both sides were proud that Morgan had made it big. They were happy for their granddaughter too. There was plenty of money and attention from grandparents on both sides, but the young couple didn't need any help. Then, within a year, everything fell apart. The leap year took away his wife and daughter, and everyone turned into a shadow of their former selves. Morgan supported both his wife's parents and his own, but it didn't make it any easier for anyone. Whitney was their only child, and they had only one as well. Now everyone had resigned themselves to the fact that their son would remain a grieving widower for life. His parents had long given up hope that their family would welcome any little ones. That's what Rebecca thought about when Morgan asked her about the children. It seemed that everyone lacked something for happiness. Morgan would have been happy to have children, but his money brought him no joy. Rebecca could greatly benefit from financial support, but there was none to be had, while the children were doing just fine. Yes, you know, everything's fine. They're alive and healthy. She didn't mention that her husband was gone. Morgan was probably already aware. The gossips in the village spread news quickly. There was no need to pour from empty to empty. Well, look. If you need any help, here's my number just in case. Morgan took out a pen and scrawled the numbers on a piece of paper. Thank you, she said. He looked at her with such a sympathetic gaze that Rebecca was now certain he knew she was a widow. He just decided not to pursue the topic out of delicacy. Only those who have been spared grief love to dwell on sad events and discuss them in detail. Those who have experienced loss themselves never say too much if the conversation partner clearly doesn't want to engage in a stirring and painful discussion. What am I to do now? Rebecca continued to ponder when Morgan left, glancing back at her several times. She didn't know. She decided to call friends and acquaintances, trying to ask for money to borrow. This idea came from Morgan leaving his number. Of course, asking him would be inappropriate since Rebecca hardly knew him, but there were still friends of Ernest, her own acquaintances, and just familiar faces. She went through the list of numbers alphabetically. It was very embarrassing. She dialed another phone number and repeated the same thing. Sorry, this is so awkward, but I really need money for an operation. Her conversation partners seemed taken aback, explaining that they didn't have much themselves. The maximum amount she managed to borrow was very small, and even that was promised to be sent in 2 installments over the course of a week. Most acquaintances asked her not to pay them back, but in the end, it became clear that the idea was doomed to fail. She had managed to collect around $1,000 in total. With that amount, it was definitely impossible to afford the surgery. It wouldn't even be enough to pay for housing, let alone dream about a kindergarten for 3 children. There was neither time nor strength to work. Even her small cleaning job took almost all the time she had allotted for sleep. Each day grew worse. She had to accept this reality since soon she wouldn't be around, and no one would be able to help. Her parents had been fortunate. They died but left her to her beloved grandmother. But Albert, Alfred, and Alan were not so lucky. Neither their grandmother nor grandfather would take them in. They would be sent to an orphanage, and that would be the end of it. She had to face the truth. It was time to go dying in the village. Perhaps the neighbors would help in some way, and when she was gone, they would call the right people. Suddenly, she remembered Morgan and decided to call him. Morgan, I wanted to ask if you could give us a ride to the village? We have a lot of things. Of course. I was visiting a friend from my former job in the hospital, and I'm heading back today. I can adjust to your schedule. I have a big car, so everything should fit. He even seemed a bit happy. It would be better if it were tomorrow. We need to gather our things, Rebecca requested. Are you planning to stay long? He asked in surprise. Well, yes, we found a buyer for Grandma's house, Rebecca lied again. She just didn't want to say how bad things were. Oh, well, okay. Then call me and let me know when you're ready. It's good that we ran into each other. I'll help you move your things. I'll deliver everything in perfect condition. Morgan genuinely seemed pleased to help in any way he could. Thank you. It seems fate is lending a hand, Rebecca said sadly. The sign from life was indeed grim and indicated that there was no other way out, nor would there be. And yet, at least they would help her move. Spending all her money on a taxi, especially borrowed money, would have been very foolish. Maybe she could hold on for a little while longer. Traveling by train with the children was a risky venture. One would want to drink, another would want to eat, and the third would need to go to the bathroom. While she was attending to one, the other could run off, and what about the things? Morgan would definitely make their lives much easier. The old house of her grandmother would serve its last purpose. Well, kids, we're going to the house. You've wanted to see different animals for a long time, and there you'll see chickens and a cow. Rebecca pretended that their family was about to embark on an exciting journey. And what about the puppies? Asked Albert. He loved them very much. Whenever they went out for a walk, He always asked permission to pet each one, which meant that any outing was accompanied by numerous stops by the next pet. And the kitties? Alfred inquired. Many times, her son had urged her to get a kitten, just like the neighbors. Their huge, ginger Maine Coons sometimes ventured onto the landing, which thrilled the little boy to no end. Yes, there will be plenty of them. That was something Rebecca could promise. The village cats roamed freely wherever they pleased. And Dad? Alan asked sadly. He was the only one who remembered that their father was supposed to return from his trip. Rebecca dreaded these questions because she hadn't yet found the courage to tell the children the truth, that their father would never be back. They knew that their Grandma Caroline lived in heaven, but they were still waiting for Dad. What would happen to them if she were gone too? Rebecca secretly wiped away her tears. Of course, when he finishes his work, he will come too. It seems like it will take a long time, Albert said. But he'll bring gifts, Alfred clarified. Exactly, he'll bring us many different presents, their mother confirmed. The children were distracted and went back to their usual games, giving Rebecca some time to quietly gather her things. As they say, every day is enough to have just one worry. The next morning, everyone was ready to move. The children were joyfully squealing at the pleasant changes. Wow, you've got quite a crew here. I envy you, Morgan smiled. Yes, you certainly won't get bored with us, Rebecca replied. They traveled for more than 3 hours. Morgan managed to share stories about his work. The children listened with bated breath as he recounted his encounter with a bear, which didn't harm him because Uncle Morgan pretended to be dead. Rebecca mentioned that she planned to stay in the village for a while. She mentioned that the house might not sell so quickly and asked Morgan if he could suggest any job opportunities. You know, I'm all alone. Let me help you out. I have nowhere to spend my money anyway, he suddenly offered. No, that won't do. What will people think? After all, She didn't finish and put a finger to her lips. Morgan understood everything without words. Rebecca had warned him before the trip that the children didn't yet know that their dad wouldn't be coming back. I can pass messages through Grandma. You have to understand, I have no ulterior motives. I'm not the type to help and then take advantage of the situation. It's genuinely a good deed, and it brings me joy. Besides, there aren't many jobs in the village for moms with 3 little ones. Honestly, there aren't any at all. You'd have to spend all day in the barn or chicken coop. You know how it is, he replied candidly. Yes, but I thought I could look after an elderly person or help around the house or with the kids. Just a little part-time job would do. I know I won't be able to handle a full shift, Rebecca replied. Well, I'll try to find out, but I still think you should accept my help for the sake of your children, please. At least I'll be useful to someone, Morgan requested. And no matter how much Rebecca tried to refuse, he insisted on giving her a large sum of money, by her standards. Even the fact that Rebecca warned him she probably wouldn't be able to pay it back anytime soon didn't stop him. Listen, at my age, what do I need money for? You know all about me. Let's just not argue, he said, and angrily started moving their things into the house. But you're only 40. For a man, that's nothing, especially if there are no bad habits, Rebecca wanted to reply, but she thought it might be perceived as flirting, which would be entirely inappropriate. Especially after Morgan had driven them there and handed over a pile of money. Rebecca thought that perhaps fate was approving her decision. Everything seemed to be falling into place. They moved without any problems, and now they had some money to start with. It's true what they say, home and its walls help because they're family. Wow, this place is interesting. The boys immediately started a game of hide and seek. They seemed completely unfazed by the trip and were running around as if they were on fire. The house had 5 rooms, so there was plenty of space for them to run around. Rebecca asked them to be careful and thought she finally had a little time to sort out their things before the boys got hungry. She also needed to find clean beds because they would need to settle down as soon as they had eaten. On the wall of the large room, Grandma Caroline was looking down at her. The eyes of the woman in the photograph were slightly squinted, as if she were puzzled. "Oh, Grandma. If only you were still alive, it wouldn't be so scary. You always had advice for any situation. You would tell me what to do now. It's terrifying when there are no parents or grandparents left, and you're the oldest. It feels like loneliness," Rebecca said to her grandmother and began to cry. The tears rolled down more slowly until they dried up. This meant that her moment of weakness was over. It was time to get back to being a mother. Rebecca deftly sorted through the things, glancing at the boys to ensure nothing happened to them, because after becoming a mother, she realized that having 3 children meant 3 times the worry. Where was each child now? What were they doing? Every minute of silence seemed suspicious. Albert and Alfred seemed to be fine. One would scream when someone found him, and the other would chime in. However, Alan hadn't been heard from for several minutes. Rebecca grew concerned and went to look for him. She found her son in the far room. He wasn't doing anything dangerous. He was just sitting on an old child's chair in the corner of the room, staring out the window. She had once sat in that chair when she was little, back when her parents were still alive. The paint had worn off in places, and the gold trim had faded, yet the chair still felt somehow alive and familiar. She felt a sense of relief. "Why aren't you playing with your brothers? Are you okay?" she asked. Rebecca knew that Alan was different from his brothers. He often pondered things and observed. He was a very attentive and sensitive child. He resembled her as a little girl. Her parents had once taken her to a pediatrician, complaining that their daughter didn't like to play with other children and preferred to be alone. She could sit for hours doing nothing. The doctor they saw was wise, calming her parents and explaining that children with developed creative abilities often behaved like that. "You'll see, she'll write, draw, compose music, take photographs, or think about all of humanity," the doctor had laughed back then. In some ways, he was right. Rebecca planned to become a language and literature teacher, but it seemed she wouldn't have the chance to raise her own children. Well, maybe Alan was destined for a different fate. "Mom, there's some strange light here. It looks like a little sun is hiding under the floor," the little one replied to her question. "Oh, kids are such dreamers. They see wonders everywhere. It's a good thing. Once they grow up, they'll find out that there aren't so many miracles," Rebecca thought. "Alan, well, go ahead and play with your brothers while the sun goes back to its mother in the sky. It's probably hiding from you because it's scared. Let's set it free," Rebecca suggested. In truth, she wanted him not to sit alone, so he would be within her line of sight, and she wouldn't worry about him while attending to household tasks. "Mom, I'm not little. I really see the sun," her son said, hurt. He realized that she didn't believe him. Alan pointed at the strange glimmer falling on the floor. "That's just the sunlight shining through the curtains. Can't you see?" Rebecca explained patiently. "No, look over here." The boy got up from the chair and went to the corner where the light fell. Rebecca noticed that there really was a glow there, but she continued to think it was just reflections and didn't come any closer. She waited for her son to calm down and realized that there was nothing interesting there. "Mom, something is lying there." He continued to peer through the small gaps in the floorboards. For appearance's sake, Rebecca moved closer, but she didn't notice anything. Then Alan suddenly put his little fingers in a tiny, barely noticeable indentation, and it gave way. A lid opened, and a golden light filled the entire corner of the room. "See, you didn't believe me. Look at how clever your son is." The boy jumped with joy. When he was excited, he always referred to himself in the third person. Rebecca hurried to pull her son away from the open hatch, peeked inside, and was taken aback. The entire cellar was filled with shiny objects. It looked like antique gold. She pulled out a few coins and discovered old engravings on them. "Mom, look, I think this would suit you." Alan pulled out a bracelet with stones from the pile of treasures. They appeared to be large rubies. The other brothers came running at the noise, all exclaiming in unison, "Oh, are these Grandma's toys? Did she give them to us?" "I found them," Alan said. He shielded the treasures with his body and declared that they were only for Mom. He intended to give them to her because tomorrow was her birthday. "Do you remember, son?" Rebecca cried, touched. "Uncle Morgan said he would bring you a gift tomorrow," her son honestly confessed, adding that he had managed to beat him to it. Just a week had passed, and news of the treasure found in the old house that no one wanted to buy spread through all the local newspapers. Even on television, they showed an interview in which Rebecca explained that Alan had actually discovered the treasure and that it was his birthday gift. "Well, I hope your son doesn't mind that you'll only get part of it, since the rest will go to the government," the host smiled. "I think the gift is still the best," she smiled back. When the inventory was taken, it turned out that the family had suddenly become real wealthy people. The gold jewelry, precious stones, coins, and antique banknotes represented a substantial fortune. The amount was several times higher than what was needed for the operation. Rebecca was so stunned that she let slip to Morgan that surgical intervention was needed, but she didn't know whom to leave the children with. "That's not a problem. My parents would be happy to look after the kids, and I'll take you to the hospital. It seems fate is helping you. I don't think you should delay." He seemed to care about Rebecca as if she were the closest person to him. "Yes, I suppose I'll do that." She called the doctor, informed him that money had been found, and asked to be operated on as soon as possible. "Yes, I saw you on television." "Well, everything seems to be going well for you," the doctor rejoiced. "But how did all this end up in your house?" "Well, you know, the journalists discovered that it once belonged to a wealthy squire. It was a 2-story house back then, but they removed one floor, and now it looks odd. No one suspected it had such a rich history. Perhaps this landlord hid the treasure but was unable to retrieve it for some reason," Rebecca speculated. "Yes, what an amazing story. You know what, come in tomorrow. I was actually planning to go on vacation, but it looks like I'll have to wait a long time." "We'll take you tomorrow," Marcus Edwards proposed. Rebecca explained to the children that she needed to go to the city for a short while, and the next day she was already at the clinic. She asked Morgan not to tell anyone how serious everything was. "You see, I'm doing everything to survive for my children, but just in case, I've made a will for them, and I ask you, if anything happens, to make sure everything is carried out." "I can see you're an honest man," Rebecca requested before the operation. "Don't say that. It won't happen a second time," Morgan mumbled. "What?" Rebecca was surprised. "I won't lose the woman I care about. But don't think you owe me anything. It's just, apparently, a one-sided feeling. Such is unrequited love. I want you to know, it's very important to me that you live." Morgan kissed her pale hand, gently brushing his lips against it. For some reason, Rebecca's heart beat joyfully. She was happy to know that she was needed by someone else. Not just by anyone, but by an adult who helps her in everything and doesn't ask for anything in return. Of course, Morgan was older than her, but that difference didn't bother her as long as there were feelings involved. When Rebecca was put under anesthesia, she first saw her parents. Dad and Mom waved to her cheerfully, and she was little again. Rebecca thought they were calling her, but her parents began to send her away, and her mother said they wouldn't meet again anytime soon. "You'll live to see your great-grandchildren," she promised. Her heart felt both joyful and sad. On one hand, she wanted to be with her parents longer, but on the other, her own children were waiting for her, and they needed her desperately. Another person, almost losing hope for love, was also waiting for her, and she liked him. Then Grandma Caroline appeared before her eyes. "Don't be foolish, marry him." Grandma shook her finger sternly while smiling at the same time. "Marry whom?" Rebecca asked. "Oh, as if you don't know who brought you to my house. You'll have a daughter, and name her after me. All the misfortunes and hardships fell to me, but my great-granddaughter will be happy," Grandma said. "Oh, thank you," Grandma, Rebecca said for some reason. For what? Actually, that's heartfelt thanks from our entire lineage. Be happy and live joyfully. Even if sometimes you feel sad, it's okay. Grandma hugged her goodbye. And someone else wants to talk to you. Suddenly, Ernest appeared. He stepped out from behind her. He looked so young, just like in the days when they first met. Ernest, forgive me. I couldn't protect you, she said and began to cry. Rebecca, what are you talking about? I was happy with you, and I'm fine here too, to be honest. Just forgive my parents. They didn't mean any harm, they're just weak. And I don't ask you to look after the kids, since I know you do everything for them. You are my love. He kissed her and said that she needed to let him go, then the pain in her chest would stop. How can I let you go? She was trying to understand what was happening. The bright light blinded her eyes. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Thank God you've woken up, said a familiar voice nearby. Who is she talking to? The new nurse wondered. Someone very important. And it was only then that Rebecca realized she had already chosen her life, otherwise she wouldn't have woken up. 2 weeks of rehabilitation flew by in the blink of an eye. She felt like she was flying home on wings. The doctors said the operation had been successful and that she was lucky. Of course, I need to live long enough to see my great-grandchildren, she repeated her mother's words. It's good to see you so optimistic. You know, if a patient is determined to live long and happily, the chances of the illness returning are not very high, Marcus Edwards rejoiced. Throughout this time, Morgan had been by her side. He didn't say much, but he shone brighter than a gold ingot, one of those that Alan had spotted under the floor. He was simply happy that Rebecca was alive and that she felt good and calm with him. Rebecca was recovering quickly and no longer doubted that everything would be okay. You know, Dad won't be coming back. He went to Grandma, but he left us a lot of money that Alan found. Rebecca finally decided to tell the children the truth. Rebecca, are you going to sell the house? Her neighbor asked. Recently, there had been many eager buyers willing to pay any amount. People hoped that another treasure was hidden somewhere. No, it has changed hands too often already, and now it has given us its wealth. It has acknowledged us as its owners, so it will still serve us. I'm planning to make some renovations there. Rebecca knew it was silly to think of the house as a living being, but she truly didn't intend to sell it. It wasn't just about the treasure. Memories of her family, her parents, childhood, and grandmother lived here, and strangely enough, happy memories resided here too. That's the right decision. And if you find anything else, the money will be yours. The neighbor interpreted her response in her own way. She wanted to ask if everything was serious between Rebecca and Morgan. He seemed to be spending an awful lot of time with her and had become quite cheerful. Previously, he had been a grim hermit. In the village, the widower rarely appeared at his parents' house, and when he did, he was reluctant to engage, just handing over money and leaving. Now it was the opposite. It was clear that something serious was developing. Well, let's not scare away happiness. Let them sort things out, Stephanie mumbled to herself and decided not to stick her nose into other people's affairs. She loved Rebecca's late grandmother dearly and respected Morgan's parents, so if those two were to marry, everyone would be happy, and she wouldn't ask any questions. What are you saying, Stephanie? Rebecca didn't understand. Oh, nothing. I just thought. But if there's any event, don't forget about the old lady. Seeing Rebecca's puzzled look, the elderly woman added, like a wedding, for example. Don't think I'm a gossip. Rebecca laughed and promised that if such a celebration occurred, she would definitely invite Stephanie first. She couldn't keep her promise because a year later, Morgan invited his parents first and secretly told them that he and Rebecca were expecting a baby, and if it was a girl, they would name her Caroline. The wedding was indeed loud and festive, filled with children. And the bride was pregnant. She had to refrain from alcohol, but everyone was in a joyful and celebratory mood. And when the three brothers welcomed a baby sister later that year, the whole village already knew her name, Caroline Jr.